Good morning, good afternoon to everybody joining. I know we still have a few people logging in, but it is 10 o'clock Arizona time, and today's webinar is on campaign workflow, the ins and outs. Hopefully you guys will learn something that you didn't know. My name is Birgit Hippel, and I will be the presenter today. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. I will hopefully get to all of your questions along the way. I also suggest that if you have some really detailed questions about how your system is set up and how you want to set up and utilize campaigns, then please by all means set up a call with your account manager here at Workamajig, and they will definitely be able to assist you and kind of go through those detailed nuances that you might have. All right. Can everybody hear me okay? Everybody good? Getting all situated? I see we're still getting people logging in. And let's go ahead. If you notice on my screen, I have the help guide open. So for those of you who are not used to utilizing the help guide, it's support.workamajig.com. And if you type in campaign overview into the search option, then you'll be able to see the campaign information. There are all the links for the information that I'm going to be referring to you. And thank you for letting me know you guys can hear me loud and clear. Perfect. Appreciate that. All right. Also remember too that it's easy to bookmark the help guide. We also have this chat feature down here. So if you haven't used it, if you have some kind of quick, easy questions that you need a question for and you don't want to necessarily wait until you email into your account manager, the chat feature is here. And of course, you do have any of those webinars, as in we always try to show the upcoming webinars for the next couple for the next 2 months, I believe, is what we're trying to always post out into the future. All right, so let's go ahead and begin. I just want to make sure I'm not missing any questions that are coming in. So campaigns, what's the purpose of a campaign? It's really that ability to be able to group multiple projects together under one umbrella. If you kind of want to think of it like a super project where it has a lot of the same features that an actual project does, but it really is that ability to say, I want to group my projects together, whether it's for scheduling purposes, whether it's for billing purposes, or just plain budget information. All of that can be seen there within the campaign. Regardless of why you create a campaign, campaigns can be created very simply, easily, and it's easy to either link existing projects to a campaign or to create your new projects directly from within that campaign. Okay, let's kind of look at basic navigation first. If you're coming over to your main menu and you come to project management, then you have the campaigns module. Okay, this is your active campaigns page. I have quite a few campaigns in here, so mine takes a moment to load, but it is very similar to your active projects page. Okay, within that, and once it starts to load, there we go. There's my my page. You of course have the columns across the top. You may modify if you have those rights to kind of modify in system settings. You know, there's the edit columns button. This is editing the columns that you see on this page. So you of course want to make sure whether you're setting it up for your team or whether you actually have the rights to come in and edit those columns, you want to make sure that you're displaying the columns that make sense to your team. If you're not billing out of the campaign, or if you're only really looking at project budget information, or budget versus actuals comparison, you want to make sure that you're displaying the fields that you need to. And then, of course, you have that display order where it's a drag and drop to make sure that you're displaying the fields in the order that you want to see them. Now, of course, not everyone has the right to system settings, but if there are some questions about the fields that are being displayed, you may want to talk to somebody in your group that has those rights to be able to edit the columns and make them view the way that you want. You also in here have display options. Now, everyone has display options, okay? And that is basically saying, you know, what am I showing on my active campaigns page? Am I only showing the active ones? Which is generally what you like to do, because you kind of want this board cleaning out as campaigns become inactive and they're completed and they're done. Let's take them off of this board, because you've always got that ability to see all campaigns over here in your views. You know, so if you want to come back and see some of those closed or completed campaigns, you could come to your all campaigns view and be able to view them here. Now, one of the things I always like to point out is this global search. Views, project management, campaigns brings up the exact same views that you have from the campaign screen. Sometimes you're on a different page, or maybe you're on a custom report or a project budget analysis report, and you want to be able to come over and see that. You've got that nice ability to see any of your views that you have the security rights to see, whether it's projects or whether it's your campaigns. You can do that here from global search. So always remember that your global search does three things. It can search for different things. It can show you the most recent items, as well as the fact that it can bring up the listing views of any of the items that you have available to you. Okay. Let's talk about some of the system setup or security rights before we even get to adding new campaigns. So if I come over to my main menu, admin manager, and system setup. Now, once again, there are many of you on this call that may not have access to this area, but in order to be able to view those, you need to make sure that you've got the right security rights for this. So what I like to do is, when I have my active campaigns page open, or I have another page open, before I click on system setup, one of my little cheats I have is I will hold my shift key down, and that allows this new page to open on top of my old page. That way I don't have to wait for this page to reload again. I can go through my system setup or another page that I need to access, and then just click off of it, and I'm back to my campaigns. If we talk about transaction preferences, it has a section for campaigns, and it really has to do with how are my campaigns being numbered. Am I doing the same type of numbering that I do for projects, where I'm picking, you know, the year it was created, the client ID, and then, excuse me, and then the next available number? I apologize for that. Just like projects has that, we can select the numbering. Campaigns have the same type of thing. In security settings, the one below it is where we start talking about what rights, who has the ability to even view campaigns and edit campaigns. So if in the search I type in campaigns, you will see that there's a view. This gives you the right to be able to see the active campaigns page and be able to see some of the listing screens. And then, of course, editing the campaign. Do I have the right to actually edit, change, add new ones? That's the security right. So there's only two security rights related to campaigns. Okay. Any questions at all about security rights or the transaction preferences related to campaigns? Perfect. All right. If we come in and want to add a new campaign, whether I use this plus sign to add a new campaign, or I come over to this plus sign, which lets me add many things at the, you know, whether I'm adding a new meeting or a new company, whether I want to add in a new campaign, they will both add in or open the new campaign screen. If you notice, there's also an the little star. Don't know how many of you are starting to use the favorites aspect of things, but if there is something that I'm adding often, instead of coming down to click on add a new project and then have to scroll down here to add a new project, I can actually click on the favorites and put it here at the top, so I can very quickly add a new project or add a new receipt, whatever it is that I need to add. Just puts it up in my favorite section. So if I want to take that back out, all I would have to do is click on the star and it removes it from my favorites. And then of course, if I have to, I can come back down and add that new invoice from here. So let's go ahead and add that new campaign. So the campaign name, of course, is, whether it's, is it going to be open for the entire period? Is it just my fall campaign? Whoops. Or maybe we're getting into spring and summer. I can call it my spring campaign. Of course, I'm picking my client, and I will pick my client from here. I do have GL company set up, so many of you do not have this feature that's having multiple companies within one instance. I do have that set up, and I also have multi-currency set up. So again, another item that many of you guys probably will not be dealing with. However, just to be aware, our system can handle multiple currencies. So if that's something that your company ever expands and you're needing to start, billing your clients or paying your vendors in a different currency, that is available. Whether I want to put in a start date and say, hey, we're starting this and then it's going to go on through, the end of June or something, I can go ahead and put in my start and end dates. And then of course my description. That box will expand just like the project description does when I go ahead and put in that description field. And of course I want to say that my campaign is going to be active. So as soon as I save this, you'll notice that you see a lot of the same fields that you see within a project. I can do conversations now at a campaign level. Maybe I've got specific projects within here, but I really want to have this conversation more at this higher level and retain that information here within the campaign. I also have the ability to add some custom fields. So if there's some fields within this campaign that we're not tracking that you would like to retain, you have the ability to create your own custom fields. And you also have the ability to do deliverables, route those files around and those deliverables at the campaign level rather than just at the single project level. You'll notice you also have spec sheets. You can retain files here at this level as well. Okay. Now, when we go in and add projects, you can add your projects directly from within the campaign, or you can actually link existing projects. So if we want to add projects, we're just opening this campaign, I can come in and actually add new projects, and it brings up my list of templates, and I can come in and say, well, I'm going to go ahead and add these 3 different projects. I'm going to have a brochure, a direct mail flyer, and I'm doing some website information for this campaign. And the system will go ahead and create all 3 projects at the same time for me without having to do this individually. Now it does go ahead and name the project based on the template name, just so that you know which one it created and which one is for which. So now you still have to go in and update the project. So I would come into the brochure and I'd go into the settings and I'd, go ahead and rename this, and I'd say, spring brochure. Whoops. Of course, I can't type. Spring brochure. I have all the same basic information in my project. I can then come to my estimate. If I don't have an estimate already preset on my template, I can add my estimate. Now, when we start getting into estimates, we really kind of want to start thinking about both the campaign estimate and the project estimate. Let's see, the question is, can you only link to templates or can you link to existing projects? You can definitely link to existing projects, and I'll show you that one afterwards. Okay, so creating that estimate. Not sure how many people are comfortable with using that auto pull from the schedule. So here I am in my project. I have in my schedule that got copied over all of those assigned services and allocated hours. So when I go and create that estimate, I can say, well, go ahead and pull that information from my schedule, and I can save that. And what it does is it goes out to my schedule and says, well, I see what services that you already had and those allocated hours, and I can pull that automatically into your estimate. And then of course I can bring in any expenses that I have, because I'll probably have some printing in here. And I'll say, you know, we've got $1,000 of printing and we've got a 20% markup. And so here's my estimate. And of course, as I approve that estimate, I now have a project estimate on here, and then I can make sure I move my project into production. Okay, now that's going ahead. So if I come back, you know, it'll show that this project has already gone into production. Now I can come back in here and mass update these projects and say, hey, let me go ahead and move them all into production now at the same time. Of course, I probably want to go back into all of these and update the projects and the estimates and the templates. So like on this project and this template that I had created, when I go into the estimate, I already had an estimate on my template. So it preloaded that for me when I already created my project. So all I need to do is go in and approve that. Okay, or add the expenses as need be. So now I've got both of these first two projects. Let me let this reload. Oops, didn't I update my project field? Sorry. Did I not save that update? There we go. So they're all three. So I've got two of those that already have estimates and the information that they've moved into production. And I would go through that with each of my different projects. So in answer to the one question, can I link existing projects? So maybe I created a bunch of projects and suddenly realized I probably should have put them under the campaign. I can go into link projects, and now when I type in, I can see any projects that are currently not linked to any campaign, and I can actually grab those projects and bring those into my campaign also. Okay. When I look at a project, you notice that it's showing that it's linked to the campaign. So I will see that in the project settings, there is the campaign. If I actually go in and create a new project from scratch, I can actually add it to the campaign at that time. So if I already know I've got the campaign set up, and maybe it's one of those things that we're kind of adding projects to the life of this campaign, I'm adding that new project, I can point it to that campaign at the time I'm creating the new project. Okay. Do spec sheets or files attached to a campaign automatically flow down into any project associated with it? No. So they're more spec sheets and files that are retained at the campaign level, as opposed to being very specific to this project and it has its own files and its own spec sheet. So sometimes, you know, these files might be more related to client level stuff where the client was giving us information and it's really not specific to one of the projects. Whereas if I wanted to, I would really probably, if it's related to a specific project, put those files and those specs on that project. What does approving the estimate do? So anytime that you approve an estimate, that estimate then becomes the budget. So that becomes very important, that when we have an estimate in here and it's been approved, and I've approved it for a total of $8,730 in labor and $1,200 in expenses, then whenever I come over and look at my budget screen, it will be able to show me, hey, this is what you budgeted for. And then as those actual expenses come in, you will be able to see in comparison, hey, I budgeted for 1,200 in printing and I budgeted for 10 hours of account management time. How much has actually happened? And I will be able to do that comparison between budget versus actual. So if I'm looking at it as a task level, I can see, hey, I've budgeted a total of 14 hours for my concepting phase, and then I will be able to come in and see what those actual hours are. I tend to prefer to like to see it more by item, where I can see my labor versus expenses. So as I see how much time did I budget for as an account manager versus copywriter, and then I can see those actual hours come in. I'm sorry, the budget screen takes a while to load just because it has a lot of data it's going through and calculating. And of course, depending on all the columns that you're displaying. So as that loads, let me see what other questions I have. Okay, and okay, answered that one too. All right, so here's what the budget screen looks like. Hey, I budgeted for 75 hours. And then of course, as my actual hours start coming in, I can see, you know, how much has been written off, how much is still remaining, you know, depending on, as I kind of come through and look at these, I can actually see where am I going over budget and who kind of took me over budget. And then I can see, yeah, I budgeted for some expenses, how much has actually come in and how much am I still waiting for? Okay. That becomes very important at both the project level and at the campaign level. So one of the things about a budget too, and depending on if you have the ability to see the project snapshot, and I know I'm getting a little off the rabbit trail here, but the project snapshot to me is really important for account managers or project managers if they're reviewing their projects to be able to see the snapshot to say, hey, we budgeted for 75 hours. How many actual hours have come in? We budgeted for $9,300. How much has actually come in once we start looking more at dollar amounts? And then as far as billing is concerned, you know, I've budgeted for 93. How much have I actually billed on this project? And how much is still remaining to be billed? Okay. All right. So you have the ability to come in here and create new projects and link existing projects to this. Or of course, if you just add a new project, you can point it and link it directly to the campaign from here. Okay. Now, one of the things that you see in here is we have something called segments. Now, sometimes we'll get asked the question a lot, can you have like parent and or grandparent and parent campaigns, you know, multiple levels within a campaign? You cannot. You can have a project linked to one campaign. It cannot be linked to multiple campaigns. However, what you can have is what we call segments. Segments is a nice way to be able to group my various projects within my campaign. Okay, so for some of my clients, you know, they just have a small list of projects because they sold a bundle to the client and said, hey, if you do these 5 projects, we'll go ahead and give you a discount. Here's the 5 projects. We've put them under the campaign. I have others that'll have, you know, a campaign that's open for the entire year and they're constantly adding new projects to this and it just becomes this long list. So this is, to me, is where segments come in handy. Segments basically says I want to group my various projects that I have in here based on, you know, what types of projects I have, and maybe I want to group it that way, or maybe I'm doing it based on a time period. I've got these projects during the first quarter, these projects during the second quarter, and so forth. And so a segment is really just a text field, and you can call the segment whatever you want. So if I come in and say, well, I'm going to go ahead and add a new segment, and we've got a print segment. So for all of my print information, and maybe I've got a, you know, this brochure catalog I'm also doing, or maybe we'll do this reprint, and I'm going to go ahead and save, creates the project and puts the project within the segment at the same time. So here's the project. Of course, when I come into the settings, it recognizes that it's part of this campaign, but it now recognizes that I have a segment set up. I can change it. I can take it off of that segment if I want, or I can later on link existing projects to not only the campaign, but to the specific segment. And of course, if I come into this one, whoops, and go in and create my estimate. So this one also had an estimate associated with it. And let me go ahead and add my expense, just so you guys can see how this is going to come up in the campaign budget. I'll approve this estimate and I'll move this into production. And now I've got my first project under this print segment. Now for some of these others, you have the ability to say, well, you know what, this spring brochure is also part of it, so I can just drag and drop. This direct mail is also part of it. Now, maybe I need to create a segment, but I don't need to create any new projects. I've decided I want to organize the projects I have in there. So I can come into segments and say, well, we'll have something called websites. It's everything from website maintenance to, you know, updates to logos, things like that. I'm not going to select any templates at this point. I'm just going to save this to create the segment. Now I can go ahead and drag this down and put this under the segment. So when I open this up and I go to project settings, it is now, whoops, did it not save? Let me make sure it's saved. Let me open this back up. It didn't save it. That was why. Let me go ahead, go to project settings. It's now part of that campaign segment. If I were to add any projects, and I'd say JE is the client, you notice that when I pick the campaign, if I were to pick this campaign, it automatically recognizes that there's some segments in here and it wants to know, do you want to put one of these, this new project under that segment? You don't have to, but it's giving you that option because it recognizes you have segments set up in here. All right, let's see. How do we see the project snapshot that you just showed on the project main screen? Is it a security setting I would need added? Yes, so let me go back to this project. In order to see this project snapshot, that is a security setting. So once again, if you have that right under system settings, now this is one of those things that you might want to decide who gets to see the snapshot, who cares to or not. So you might end up coming to specifically to account managers and saying, I'm going to give them the right, but I'm not giving it as a company-wide default. But then when you scroll down, you've got this project snapshot. Okay, this project profitability one is more for executive owners. It's basically the P&L of the project, and that one generally is not always shown to typical creatives, project managers, that type of thing. But the project snapshot is a very handy thing, especially if you're in here, excuse me, when you have any invoices, you can actually click on this. It would show the invoice and you could open the invoice directly from here. So it has some very handy features to it that I really like, having that project snapshot available to people. Can campaign invoices be grouped and subtotaled by campaign segments? Yes. So once we get into billing the campaign and creating those campaign budgets, that segment will definitely come into play in those. Okay. All right. So that's how you can create projects, link existing projects to it, add new projects, and even create those segments within here. Okay. Now, of course, a lot of the reason that we have projects under a campaign is to be able to view those projects in the schedule. So if I hide the Gantt view for the moment, you'll see that I have my segment. So it does organize my projects even within the schedule page within those segments. And then of course I can open that up and say, okay, these are the projects. Here's that first project. Here's the task. This is how it's displaying. And then of course I can show that Gantt view on how that project is going to show, especially if I'm in comparison to other projects. Okay. I can also control, once again, the columns being displayed across the top. So that is in the edit column sets. These are the columns that are currently being displayed. I hit the space bar here and you can see all of the fields that you might want to see from a typical project schedule. And it's very similar to looking at the traffic calendar. Not sure how many of you ever use the traffic calendar, but this would be the same kind of view that the traffic calendar would bring in. I have the ability, even in the schedule, to click on a specific task and actually update the project schedule from here. Okay, it works very similar to the traffic screens. So, maybe I want to go ahead and edit the users or adjust the allocated hours or, change any of the details within here, set my users. I can do all of that information. I can even have those meetings that I'm saying, if I've got a conversation for this project in the schedule, I can see that all directly here within the schedule screen. Okay. So that's the schedule, and I can see all of my projects based on those segments in the same way. Now, if we come into talking about estimates, do you want to create a campaign estimate? This is that overall arching budget for all of my projects combined. I generally say, hey, that's the great feature about having a campaign. So when I go to add an estimate, this is really adding an estimate at the campaign level, not at the project level. Projects have their own estimates, but I can have an overall estimate or budget for my campaign. So if you look at the estimate types down here, we have two. So this second one down here that says by project only, it's basically going to look at all of the projects in my campaign, look at the estimates in those and say, okay, I'm going to create a campaign budget based on the total of those project estimates. So an example would be, hey, we sold a bundle of projects. You get these 5 projects, we give you this discount. This is what it's going to cost you for these specific 5 projects. And here's what the grand total is off of those 5 projects. Now, maybe a client wants to be billed off of the individual projects. Great. Maybe the client says, okay, now that I purchased this bundle of 5 projects, I would just rather be billed off of the total of those 5 campaign or project budgets together as a campaign budget and just bill me once, off of each of those and kind of, I'll pay quarterly or however I want to bill. So if I create this estimate by project only, when I hit save, now I get this total field and it says, okay, I'm going to show you all of your projects based on how you have them set up in your segments, and you'll be able to click in and say, do I want to grab all of the estimates that I have? So maybe you have some change orders as well as the original estimate. And I said, yes, I want all of the approved estimates on all of my projects. And I don't know if I have one in here. I don't have one in here yet. I still need to go and add that. In fact, let me go and quickly add that estimate in here. Do an estimate, add, and I don't remember. Yep, I'm going to pull from schedule And I'm going to go ahead and approve that. And when I come back into my campaign estimate, come into here, pull this, going to grab that estimate also. And so the total of all my projects together is 42,000. Client might want to be billed off of each individual project, or he may want to just be billed off of this nice total amount that you can do at the campaign level. So if I bring this campaign estimate in and approve this, I have now created a campaign budget. So when we look down at the budget screen, I see that I have a campaign budget of 42,000. I have my different projects underneath here with a total of print budget of 28,000 based on these 3 projects. And of course, now I have my website that's for 13,000, and I can see those project totals. Okay. Once again, the fields that you see in your budget screen, just like in your project screen, you will want to make sure that you're displaying the fields that make sense to what you're looking at. If you never do any campaign billing, or you're always going to be billing at the campaign level, then you will want to make sure that in your campaign budget settings, once again, a security right to be able to edit this, you can edit these columns and saying, well, maybe I do a lot of campaign billing, and I'd like to bring in the campaign amount billed. I'd like to change the display order, and I'd like to bring that all the way up towards the top, and I can say done, and I can bring that in, and now I have the campaign amounts. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're bringing in the fields that make sense to you. And of course, as I scroll across, you'll be able to see all of as those project actuals come in, you're going to be able to see it against your project budget hours. And then you're going to, of course, be able to see the total of all of the expenses on the project, including labor, and compare that to the budget on the campaign. Okay. One of the things that I like to do whenever I edit the columns across the top, especially if I have to scroll, if you notice that I've locked these 2 columns. So if I go into the campaign budget settings, it's got locked columns right there. So it basically says, hey, hold those 2 spots so that no matter how many fields I scroll across, I'll always be able to see, the campaign, the segment, and the project names, no matter how far I scroll over. So I like to make use of those locked columns. Okay. Any questions at all so far about creating that campaign estimate based on those projects and being able to see that within the campaign budget? All right. Are you able to bill under the main campaign versus billing under each individual job? Yes, you can. So that's when we're going to get into these campaign settings where we start to talk about the bill by. Okay, I'm going to come back to the billing portion of this. I want to talk a little bit more about creating an estimate by service instead, and kind of the scenario we would have for that. And then I'll go ahead and talk about the ability to bill and what are those different options within there. Now, one of the features we have in a campaign is the ability to copy. So if you have that kind of scenario where you say, hey, we sell these bundled projects together all the time. This is a popular thing we do, and we sell these 5 projects, in a campaign. I can go ahead and create a campaign. You might create it under your own company name and, title it do not use, or, campaign template, something like that. Because then what you can do is you can come in and copy that campaign. You can even copy it to a different client, but the question will be, okay, now that I want to create my new campaign, and it might even be for a different client, of course. And if I say, summer campaign, and I can come into my client and I'll go ahead and pick a different client. I'm going to go ahead and pick my Jericho. course, which GL company? Am I still doing it in the same currency? Am I copying the projects? Am I copying the project files? Generally, I tend to not copy the files, but it depends on if they were on the template for a reason and you want those files with every time you sell this bundle, then definitely copy those files. And then do you want me to copy the estimates that are already in this campaign and in the project level? So if I go ahead and hit save, it will create my new campaign. It created all new projects. Of course, now it's new using my new client. And so it's created all new projects again. And it's even copied over the estimate. So let's go and first talk about these projects. When it copies them over, it does not approve the estimate in the projects. So you'll still need to come in and actually approve the estimates, because it figures you might want to change something in the project estimate. If you, and we'll go ahead and come into this one, and I'll go and update this estimate and approve it. And we'll come down, let's come down to this one, estimate. Let's approve it. And I'm going to move all of these into production. Now, the big difference about this one is on this estimate, we're not going to do this by project. Okay, so I'm going to actually just unapprove this one. I can actually even delete it and say, you know what, for the estimate that I'm going to have on this one, I'm going to do it based on service only. So in this scenario, maybe I say, I've got this campaign with this client. He's given me an overall budget. Hey, I've got $300,000 to spend, and this campaign will be open for the next year. And I'm going to have you add projects throughout the year. And I just want to make sure that I do not go over the budget that we put in the campaign. So in this scenario, you would have projects coming in throughout the year. It wouldn't just be a specific set of, you know, these 5 projects and this is done. So if I create a service only estimate, then what I have is when I come into the labor portion, I have both print and website. It recognizes, once again, I have my 2 segments, and I say, well, for print, and at this point, I don't care about the services and the specific hours. I'm really going to do that on my project, but I just want to put in that total overarching amount. And I say, well, you know what, we've got $100,000 to spend on print jobs. And when we come down to website, we've got, you know, let's say $200,000 to spend on website information. Okay. And those updates and those projects we're going to have. So now I have a total budget of $300,000. And again, whether I want to include expenses or whether this already includes expenses or not, I'm really looking at that overarching total amount that I want for this campaign. So if I go ahead and approve this one, kind of changes the way my campaign now looks. So when I look into that budget screen, I've got an overall budget of $300,000. I've got my individual segment saying it's broken up as spending $100,000 total on any print jobs. Website, we're spending a total of $200,000. And as my individual projects get added and those estimates get updated, I'm really looking at this number to make sure I don't spend more than this, or to watch that I'm not getting ready to go over budget. So I'm, you know, watching that and letting the client know, hey, we're getting close to budget on our print jobs. That way he's aware of, okay, this is what is still remaining and how many more projects do you want to bring in? And maybe I have a change order that he's going to go, okay, well, let's expand the budget by another 20,000, et cetera. So this is really that, just that I've got this overarching budget, and I want to make sure as my projects come in that they don't exceed that amount. Okay. Now, That does bring us to the billing option then. So in the campaign settings, now this is the part that can tend to get kind of confusing. And with campaign settings, we have a bill by. Okay, the bill by defaults to say we're going to bill by project. That means that no matter how my projects are set up, they're fixed fee, time and materials, retainers, and whether I'm doing mass billing, project billing, or billing worksheets, I am still going to be looking at the project to bill. Okay, the campaign just has a nice way to group things so that if I happen to come over to, let's say, my billing page, and I look at my billing page and I want to filter. So if I come into, let's say I'm in fixed fee, and as this loads, sorry about that, I have the ability to filter by a specific campaign. So I can come over here and say, well, I just want to see all the projects associated with this campaign. Or if I'm utilizing billing worksheets, I can come in and say, I'm just looking for all the projects related to this campaign. So it becomes just a filter option when I start billing, whether it's project billing or mass billing and billing worksheets. Okay, so that's bill by project. It says I'm a grouping option and I get to filter based on this campaign. These fields right here don't make any difference. They're really have to do with if I change this to bill by campaign. Now, this is where it can get very confusing. So if you don't remember all the details, again, talk to your account manager. They're more than happy to help you with this and sort out what do you need within this. If I change this to bill by campaign and I save, that actually, oops, did it not save? Bill by campaign, save. All right, why is my campaign not coming up right? Let me close this. Look at my campaign screen went away. Oops. Okay, there it went. It was a little slow at loading. If I go to the bill button within the campaign, so now that I've changed this to bill by campaign, I actually have a bill button, and what it's doing is it's bringing in that estimate from the campaign, that overall estimate. Now, whether I want to create a revenue invoice or an advanced bill invoice, it's literally billing a fixed amount, like a fixed fee project, but it's doing it at the campaign level. I can come in and say, well, I'd really like to bill it more based on the segments that I have set up. So I've got print and website, and I can go ahead and bill based on a percentage of that and say, well, I just want to bill 50% of that now of each of those segments. Okay. I also have the option to bill by a percent of the project. So here are my different projects, whether I want to just bill the first one because that's all we've gotten done so far, or I want to bill off of a percentage of all of those projects, I could do that too. Okay, so that's that option to be able to say, hey, I want to bill a campaign budget, the estimate, and it gives me the bill button. Okay, bill by. What this also does, and this is where the confusion really begins, if I am using billing worksheets, so if I'm generating billing worksheets, what this is doing is it's using this as a grouping option. It's still in billing worksheets going to bill the individual projects and whatever the billing method is on the projects, but it's going to group it and put it on one invoice. It's basically the same as saying, I want to do one invoice per client. I've got 3 different projects. I'm going to bill them all, but I want them all on one invoice rather than 3 separate invoices, but it is still billing however the project is set up. So this becomes like a one invoice per. I'm going to put all these projects on one invoice for this campaign, and that's how Billing Worksheets works this. Okay. The newest option we have is this button that says use the campaign budget. And maybe that's where I should have put, I knew there was something I should have done. Let me unapprove this. Let me add some expenses in here. So if we add some expenses and we say, oops, yeah, printing, and it's going to be part of the print segment. And we're going to be billing, let's say, $25,000 worth of print. And then I approve. So for those of you who might be used to doing fixed fee billing on a project, you have this. If I say I'm going to use the campaign budget, that means I'm going to bill the client off of this 300,000 or 325,000 now. And I'm going to do this as a fixed amount. And I want to be able to do this either in billing worksheets or mass billing, which gives us now a new category called fixed fee campaigns. So you can now mass bill your campaigns when you're doing it at a campaign budget level. Okay. So just as if you have any project, that if you set up a project, by the way, if you go into the billing methods of a project, you have the ability to say, hey, I want to do this off of a fixed amount. You get that expenses not included option. We added that same ability at the campaign level. Okay. For those of you who don't do a lot of fixed fee billing, this might not make a lot of sense. For those of you who do, who are always billing fixed fee, this is probably very common for you. So if I say I want to use the campaign budget, it's literally taking the entire budget in here, and I can even create a billing schedule. So my entire budget is 325,000. And if I say, well, I'd like to bill, 50% up front, it's going to take half of the total budget. And I can have a billing schedule. And when I come over either to generate billing worksheets or I come over to mass billing, I have a fixed fee campaigns category in both of these now that says I can go and look at that campaign budget, and I can look at the billing schedule on that campaign and know when to bill that amount. Okay. Now, there is an option in here for that expenses not included. So this was a little bit tricky that they added, but it was so awesome that they did get it added. This is basically saying, if I check this box, this is basically saying, I want to bill the campaign budget, just the labor. But as the actual expenses come into my projects, okay, so as the actual expenses, so let's say on this project here, I had an expense come in, and we're going to say we had some printing that happened, and it was, $1,000, and there's a 20% markup. So I've got a $1,200 billable out to the client. So if I'm in my campaign and I say I'd like to bill the campaign budget, the 325,000, but I really want to be able to bill the expenses, the actual expenses that hit all of my different projects. And I go and look at a billing schedule now and I say, well, gosh, if I wanted to bill 50%, it's actually taking 50% of just the labor budget, because it says, I'm going to take your budget, but then as actual expenses are going to come in, we're not going to be billing the budget and expenses, we're going to be billing the actual expenses. So if I came in and set this in, then what happens in my bill button, I actually have, and let's change this to segment. I actually have this, it's going to bill 50% of just the labor portion, and then it recognizes the actual expenses that hit my project, and it will bill those combined. So if I were to come into that billing screen and I looked at my fixed fee campaigns and I go to this campaign, it says, okay, you have a $300,000 labor budget and you want me to bill 50% of the labor budget, but I also see that you have some extra expenses, the actual expenses that came in. So I'm going to bill 50% of the labor budget as well as the extras. Okay, works just like a fixed fee project does. Same options within there. Okay. Let's see. What about billing out monthly based on the total campaign budget? Would you create a retainer for the campaign? No, I would actually just create a billing schedule off of the campaign budget. And if you wanted to, let's say you had a $200,000 budget for a 10-month period, I would create a billing schedule saying, I'm billing $10,000 a month. And every month, and then it would just come up as a fixed fee campaign that I'm billing off of the campaign budget. And the reason I would prefer being able to bill off of a fixed fee campaign versus a retainer is I think you have more reporting capability, because a campaign and a project are very similar and you can report on them and you can report the actuals and the project actuals, etc., all within multiple different screens. Whereas a retainer to me is really very limited on its reporting capabilities. I would keep those for like, hey, I've got hosting fees I get to charge you, and maybe there's some extras I get to charge, but it's pretty specific exactly what happens. To me, campaigns really give me a lot more flexibility in the ability to see, the details and what I'm doing within my campaign, especially when I start looking at the budget screen. What have I built on the campaign? What's already come in on the projects? What are the actuals? In that sense, I would rather use a campaign, but that would work too. Yeah, so that was, sorry, I didn't see your second part, or create a billing schedule based on a fixed fee. And yes, that's what I would do, mainly for the reporting capability. Can the include expenses be controlled at the project level, some projects on and some projects off? No, you cannot control which ones you do, but what would happen in here, whether it's the billing screen, mass billing, billing worksheets, when it brings up the extras, you don't have to bill. You can say, no, I'm actually not going to be billing this one. And if you're, let's say, in a billing worksheet, you can go ahead and mark that transactions as billed and not bill it. So you would see the full list of all of the actual expenses. It would group them by project, and then you could decide at that point, do you want to bill those expenses now? Do you want to write off any of those or mark as billed, or just save it for later because we're going to save all the expenses more closer towards the end and then we'll bill the extras? So it just says it makes them available to bill, not necessarily that it will do the actual billing. Okay. What are the benefits of campaign budgets versus planning project budgets? So the planning project doesn't quite have all the same options and features that I think a campaign does. I will say this, if the campaign, the only thing to me that the campaign is missing is the fact that you can allocate hours for things that you have not set up in the project yet. Like, I know that I need an account manager just to manage different things for 5 hours, every month or every week, to manage things, and I just need it to show up in the staff schedule screen. That's really the planning project, allows you to be able to set up those allocated hours when you don't actually have a project yet. And then of course, as you add projects, it can reduce those allocated hours. So that is the one thing missing from campaigns. However, for me, most of the time, people have actual projects that they specifically need. And under that campaign and the way I can set up my estimates and my projects and my budget and the billing options, I would kind of look between the two. I still tend to see campaigns used more than planning projects. Okay. Should you set up both for every contract each time? As far as like a planning project and a campaign, again, to me, the planning project is, do you need to allocate hours for people that you don't have a designated project for? And you need that to show up in the staff schedule screen. That's really what that planning project was for. So if you have that need, then you would definitely need to have the planning project. Would you still need to have the campaign? If you're going to build the projects based on project level, then you probably don't need the campaign, because the campaign is going to serve very similar to the planning project, where it's grouping them all under that planning project. If you start getting into more of the ideas of a campaign budget and being able to advance bill off of my campaign and then bill my individual projects. So this is where, to me, that specific call with your account manager would come in very handy to look at what are your needs within these, and how often do you need that planning project versus just setting up a campaign. A lot of my clients have more just this typical campaign need, where they've either been given an overall budget or they've sold a bundle of projects together and they'd like them grouped together that way. How about billing campaigns as an advanced at scheduled invoices, including expenses, then recognizing the revenue at the project level? Yes, that is possible too. So if you want, to create your, do your advance bill just directly from the campaign, and come in and create that advance bill the way that you want, and yet still bill the projects, and in that sense, you wouldn't be using the campaign budget. You'd be setting this to bill by campaign. And then you can have that campaign advance bill that you can apply to any one of the individual projects that you bill within the system. But do note that, by the way, that as soon as I am not billing the campaign budget, that takes away the billing schedule option. Okay, so you would have to come in here to create your advance bill for the campaign, and then you don't even have to check this box. As long as you've got bill by campaign, go ahead and create your estimate, or your advance bill gives you the bill button here, and then you can go ahead and bill the rest of your projects the way you normally would, whether it's through mass billing or billing worksheets, or even ad hoc billing. Okay. Any other questions about billing? I know that there's a lot of details that go into billing and how do you want to bill. Even in the mass billing for fixed fee, the system says, we recognize whether you have segments or not, because that may affect how you generate the invoice. So if I were to come over here, this one actually has segments. So I know that I have segments. So if I wanted to filter out those with just segments only, I could come over and generate and actually invoice by segment. Okay, so the system recognizes. So you have that ability to say, hey, I need to filter out and just see my campaigns with segments so that I can generate my invoice per segment. Okay. One last thing I wanted to point out on campaigns is this team tab. We made a change recently to this. If you know the team that is to be added to all of your projects, you could come into this team tab, add your team in here. So, if I came in and brought in my different employees onto this, then what it will do is, if I auto assign and push, it won't actually push the hours and whatnot, but what it will do is it will go out to my individual projects and it will actually push that team to every one of my projects. Okay, so if you, instead of having to come into each one and add the same team to, 15 projects, I could add the team here, which will then push it out and add them to the team here using their default service from their employee record. And then I can just go ahead and push that out to my schedule. But that way I'm not having to manually add those people each time. Okay. Hopefully I answered everybody's questions. I appreciate everybody being here. If you do have any future questions, please reach out to your account manager or reach out and look at our campaign overview. This recording will be out in the help guide once it finishes processing, and we will have that visible here for you. All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate you guys all being here. Appreciate all the questions. And I will talk to you later. Thank you.